Today, I am going to be talking about relationships, and some of this talk is going to be based on chapter 3 of The Heart is Noble by Gyalwant Karmapa, but you might say, getting my inspiration from there. There is a saying that I heard one time: if you have a warm place in your heart for yourself, you will be comfortable wherever you go. I am going to start about relationships with having a comfortable relationship with ourselves. And in order to have a comfortable relationship with ourselves, we have to know ourselves at a very deep level. And we have to realize that we have Buddha nature, but we're also confused. And as a result of our confusion, we make mistakes and we do things that we later regret. A very important part with having a good relationship with ourselves is parting with our faults. This also is a tradition in the West with New Year's, talking about New Year's resolutions. But this is more important than New Year's resolutions, and that we realize that we are under the influence of strong emotions. As a result of that, we begin to recognize, actually, a sign of our meditation practice being effective is that you start seeing more things that you do that you have regret about having done. Your mind clarifies and you start seeing more and more subtle behavior that is very self-centered and is frequently harmful to ourselves and definitely harmful to other people. So we need to have a constructive way to work with our mistakes and our faults. The Karmapa talks about forgiveness, and forgiveness is, in a way, giving ourselves space to grow. It gives us a possibility of moving away from our mistakes. He uses the term putting a barrier between our mistakes and ourselves. When we learn how to forgive ourselves, then we can take that and use this to forgive others. So introspection, looking within, going over, let's just say, an interaction you had with another person and just saying, now, where did it go wrong? Where did it go south? Where did my emotions get the better of me? And I ended up where I didn't want to be. So this, in a way, is a little bit of analytical meditation as well. The more that we see ourselves, the more we make friends with ourselves, and the more we need to develop forgiveness for ourselves. Now, some people are very critical of themselves, and looking at your faults might be very difficult to do because you can see your faults as being very solid, as defining who you are. But our faults do not define who we are. They just are things that we have done. The more we realize that they are just things that we have done rather than the way we are, the easier it is to work with these faults. And this really is closely related to interdependence, that we behave the way we do and engage in negative behavior, not because we're fundamentally bad, but because of interdependence and habitual patterns. So the remedy is not to dwell on our faults all the time, but when you realize a fault, forgive yourself. And a good way to do this is through what we call confession. And it can be done a number of different ways. There are formal confession prayers that you can do, but very simply, you can make up your own version. Confession means to, quote, part with or separate from. These are the words of Gyalwant Karmapa. So this is separating our actions from ourself. I like the idea that Tralek Rinpoche uses when he talks about a functional self, having a positive self-image, having an idea of ourselves as, I can do this, I can practice, I can travel the path. I can change, I can improve, realizing that your faults are not this functional self. They are part of a fabricated self, and we need to part with this fabricated self that I'm a bad person. So, the way to do this, here is a quote from Gyalwant Karmapa. If we have lied, confessing could involve openly disclosing what we have done and acknowledging that we recognize it was wrong. And you could confess to an actual person. You could confess to a visualized person. You could confess to a deity. But the idea is that you are confessing to somebody else. And so an actual person could be a lama, a trusted friend. Karmapa says you could even go out into nature, confess to a tree, maybe your favorite tree. You could visualize your lama, you could visualize Gyalwant Karmapa, but anyway, then confess. He says to avoid it being like a New Year's resolution, you want to generate a strong feeling of regret that what you did was wrong, that the action was harmful, that you don't want to have anything to do with it anymore, that you want to part from this type of behavior. And at the end, you want to have the feeling of, I'm going to be a new person now. It needs to be sincere and heartfelt, and then have this idea of a fresh start. If you do engage in the same action again, then the sooner you confess it, the easier it is to purify it. So try to keep on top of your actions of body, speech, and mind, and try to apply this remedy as soon as possible. Again, keep in mind that your actions don't define who you are. You can become a different person. I like the phrase that you hear sometimes, I need to reinvent myself. Well, this is somewhat dualistic, but it also involves a tacit admission that who you are is an invention to begin with, that you're not solid. If you can keep that in mind, in a way, this confession is reinventing yourself. Eventually, you realize that you don't have to reinvent yourself. The important thing is to break from the past, that we confess in the present what we've done in the past, so there's room to grow in the future. Now, once you have done this confession, and if it's heartfelt and sincere, there's no need for self reproach about that particular action. You've taken care of it. You don't need to keep going over and over and over that you've done this thing. Don't revisit it. It's history. Guilt is pointless. Guilt is a feeling of there's something wrong with me. I'm a bad person. I keep doing things wrong. I keep screwing up. I keep making mistakes, and so on and so forth. And it is just wallowing in bad feelings, and it keeps you stuck. It might be a familiar place to be, but you're not getting anywhere. There might be a lot of movement in your mind, but it's movement that's going nowhere. It would be a bit like instead of walking on the path, you're laying on the path and wiggling. By just revisiting the past over and over and over again, that just makes the fabricated self more solid. Let go of the past, confess it when it comes up, and then let go of it. Confession involves transformation. It's separating us from our past behavior and pointing us in a much better direction to go in. So there's this connection between forgiveness and confession. Forgiveness is letting go of the past. It is very similar to confession, that they're intertwined, I think is a good way to put it. Now, once we have been able to understand this a little bit for ourselves, then we want to, of course, be able to forgive others. Karmapa, in talking about forgiving others, says, quote, it does not mean that you condone their past behavior. It means you want to help create a future in which they no longer behave that way. So, this is an important point. We're not condoning their behavior, but we understand that they are being controlled by their conflicting emotions. He uses the example of if you are getting beaten by a stick, it's not the stick that's the problem, it's the hand that controls the stick. And the hand that controls the stick is controlled by afflictive states of mind, like anger. And so it really is the harmful emotions that are the problem. You want the person that is, shall we say, a troublemaker that you would like to forgive to realize that they're under the control of these very harmful emotions of anger and excessive attachment. That if they were calmer, a little more sane, that they probably would not behave this way. And maybe you've seen them behave in a more calm and sane manner. So we want the others that are causing us problems to be free of suffering, and that we have to realize that they create this suffering themselves, and they're creating a future that is going to be full of more suffering for themselves. Karmapa says, quote, shifting your concern from your own well-being to include a genuine concern for the other person can transform the relationship and can also transform you as a person. So as a result, you can become a person who provides well-being for others. I will say this, that we are bodhisattvas in training, and so we start with realizing what we are capable of and what our limitations are. We want to, you might say, push the boundaries of our limitations, but we also want to realize that we're only capable of doing so much. The more we can shift this so that our concern includes other people, the more we transform ourselves and transform the relationship. So it's good to pay attention when you're in relationships with other people and you start feeling that this is very uncomfortable, what's happening right now. The more you are aware of your own feelings, the clearer your mind is, and you can see the other person, the more you might see possibilities of behaving in a different way, forgiving their actions, but not, you might say, condoning their actions, and seeing a different way of responding. I like to use the example of you're playing a game, because frequently when we're interacting with other people, we're engaged in very, very habitual patterns. And it's almost like a game. Let's say in this case, tennis. The other person serves the ball. If you don't hit the ball back, the game is over with. If you do something different than what you normally would do, it might be as simple as just shutting up and not saying anything, or, "Oh, okay," and dropping it. In other words, don't put your usual reaction up there, which just keeps things going on and on and on. So it's good to be aware of what our habitual responses are and then let go of them and take into consideration other people. Another point that he makes, I think this is a very important point, and that is that all of us are full of projections, that we project our own expectations, our own judgments, our own exaggerations, and so forth. We project on ourselves and we project on the world. And the more we are aware of this, the better off we are. You could say that each one of us lives in our own separate reality that is defined by our experiences in life, our values, our judgments. Even the language that we use says a lot about judgments and the way things are looked at. Interesting enough, for instance, in Tibetan, there is no real no, like no. Rinpoche would say in Tibetan, not yes for no. What we see is really our own projections, our own mental elaborations. And somehow or another, we think that everybody else should see the world the way we see it, or else they're wrong. I remember when I, many decades ago, was suffering from extreme depression. I thought that the world sucked. I was a bad person. The world was bad. And the reason why everybody else wasn't depressed was they were confused and didn't really know what the truth really was. I came to realize as I worked through the depression that this was all me projecting on the world, and that the world actually was a lot different than I thought it was when I opened up to it and let go of these projections. These projections, they color our relationships. They prevent us from seeing people as fully human, and they get in the way of having healthy relationships. We also have to realize that other people are also projecting. They live in their own little world too, their own little version of the world, and they think it's the real one. So, part of having a good, healthy relationships is an element of accepting other people where they are, not where you think you could get them to go to. This is called patience. Karmapa talks about training in patience. Quote, patience involves an active application of wise reasoning in order to intentionally dissolve any resentment that we might harbor towards others. I like this idea of active application and wise reasoning. Also, intentionally dissolve. So it's an active, it's not passive. Patience is active, it's not just sitting around doing nothing. Again, he uses this example of being beaten by a stick. It is anger that is causing the person that is wielding the stick to beat you or somebody else. And so the root fault is the anger. He says that we're not justified to have resentment towards the person. On the other hand, we don't let people beat us with sticks or beat other people with sticks or anything else, that we're not doormats. We need to use reasoning to deconstruct this fabricated self that we have invented for ourselves and let some space in. And maybe I should explain a little bit more about the fabricated self that he talks about. And that is this idea of self that we have is made out of parts and pieces. Some things we take from habitual patterns from previous life. The name that we have is given to us by our parents. We don't choose the name. And there are many other things that we take to be who we are, that we get from our environment, from our parents, from our friends, from teachers, from the culture, from social media, advertising, movies, take your pick, from all over the place, cultural norms, and so forth. We pick and choose, take what we want, put them together, and say, this is who I am. And some people have a lot of pride about who they are. Some people think that they are very bad people. Some people think that they can accomplish a lot. Some people are just plain burnt out, and on and on and on, that we have all these different ways of relating to ourselves. It's all made up of parts and pieces. And if you analyze it and look closer, you see that these come together through causes and conditions, that they're not who we are. As I said earlier, if you run into a brick wall, you can reinvent yourself. And so the idea of fabricated means to put together from pieces, like fabricate a refrigerator in a factory. And it also has the connotation of being untruthful, not being the truth, like to fabricate evidence in a trial or to fabricate a lie. So this fabricated self has this element in it of being a result of causes and conditions rather than this is the way it is, and being somewhat untruthful, not aligned with the way things actually are. So if we can look at ourselves that way, this gives us room to change. And if we can look at other people that way, this lets us give them room for change. So instead of responding with fear and anger when another person is behaving, shall we say, rather poorly, that we can respond with compassion, courage, and the wisdom of patience. And this patience opens up new options and directions to go in. A week or so ago, I went to a friend's Facebook page and they had a long quote in there about developing compassion for other people. It made a lot of sense. And then in the comments, I kind of summed it up. I said that you start with having a warm place in your heart for yourself. And then with courage, you open up that warm spot for other people. So that would be how I would sum up this relationships with other people and people that are difficult.